Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get the electronics on here. You can't hear me okay? There we go. Okay, well, I've been teaching for about 15 years in various public and private schools, mostly physics and mathematics. I did have the pleasure of teaching physics with PEP in Milford around 2006. And married to 3 teenage children, all of whom have been homeschooled at one point or another. And I'm actually really glad to be talking to you guys today because I think we have the greatest job in the world, and I'm thankful to be here. So I usually start off the school year with a question for my students. Skip the syllabi for the first day. That's the boring, bureaucratic stuff. And I put this question up on the board. No, the button I wanted. I bought the new remote. We'll see if it works. There we go. So think about how you would imagine a high school sophomore or a junior would respond to that question.
Public school?
Anywhere. What do you think a high schooler would do?
Yeah.
Because I have to be. Yeah, my parents made me. That's a common answer.
Where else would I be?
No, they can usually answer that one pretty
I can say I love to learn.
Occasionally, I'll get the thoughtful kid that will say something like, "What do you mean by here?" But usually it's okay. School, physics or math, whatever class you're teaching. What do you think their answers start to trickle down to? Okay, good. What's in our transcript? Back up a bit. What do they want out of the class? It's required. Okay. Well, what do they
grade.
What?
A good grade.
They want a good grade. And why do they want a good grade? It doesn't take very long to get into this track. Why do they want a good grade? Too quickly. Let's do it. They want a good grade so they can get a good transcript GPA, right?
So they can get into a good college.
College.
Get a good job.
Get a good job. I keep asking them why. Why do you want a good GPA? Why do you want to go to a good college? Well, because I want a good career. Why do you want a good career? And it does. It follows into this track. Want good grades, want a good GPA, want to get on the honor roll. Want to graduate from high school, want to go to a good college, get a good scholarship, graduate college, good job. I'm chasing down what they actually want. What's the end? Yeah, some of them aren't even happy with that. I'd say, why do you want money? Happiness. I had one honest young gentleman tell me one time, no, he wanted money so he could buy a nice car. And then when he bought a nice car, he could get a girlfriend. And then he would be happy. Okay, happiness is why we're here. The Beatles tell us that money can't buy me love, so I had a little chat with him about 1960s philosophy. Okay, happiness. If you're familiar with the dialogues of Plato, you may recall that there's a conversation between Socrates and a new student named Plinius. And Socrates asks him, do not all men desire happiness? And yet perhaps this is one of those ridiculous questions which I'm afraid to ask and which ought not to be asked by a sensible man. What human being is there who does not desire happiness? And there's no one, said Plinius, who does not. Well, then I said, since we all of us desire happiness, how can we be happy? That's the next question. Shall we not be happy if we have many good things? And so they have this conversation about good things. Well, what are good things? What's the number one thing he starts off with? Good things? Money. Wealth. Yeah. If we have wealth, are we not happy? And he says, of course. What else? Health, fame, courage, wisdom, power, influence. He all agrees that that these are good things. We'll be happy if we have those things. And then he says good fortune. And then Socrates pauses himself and goes, oh wait, I almost made a fool of myself. And Plinius says, and Socrates says, well, I'm being redundant because obviously if you have good fortune, you already have that list, right? And Plinius is thinking, well, I almost made a mistake there and said something twice, and that would have been embarrassing. But then Socrates works him into the way of thinking that says, wait a second, wisdom is more redundant. Because if you have wisdom, can't you get all of those things that you said that you wanted that didn't come to you accidentally, right? So we pick up the conversation and he says, seeing then that all men desire happiness, and happiness has been shown is gained by a use, and the right use of the things of life, and the right use of them, and good fortune in the use of them is given by knowledge, the inference is that everybody ought by all means to try and make himself as wise as he can. Says, hey, flute players are like naturally the most gifted flute players, and people that are able to pilot a ship are naturally the most gifted at being able to pilot a ship. There are lots of folks that have accidentally, quote, the good things of life. You ever have students that complain to you that they're not, naturally gifted in such and such a subject that you teach? It's hard for me. I'm not like so-and-so, or I don't have, a high skill intuitively here in this particular class. Mathematics in particular, with me, I get people that complain all the time, it's hard, it takes work. Well, yes, it does. But just because you don't have a natural aptitude towards something doesn't mean that you can't learn it, right? And the learning of it oftentimes can make up for any discrepancies you might have had in natural gifting. But also, if you are naturally gifted, it makes it even more so. I was talking with Wendy here right beforehand about, she does drawing, and I had an art teacher when I was about 10 years old that was kind of scary at first, but I grew to really love her. She didn't have a right hand, and she wore a blazer, and I remember going down to the basement of the Wichita Art Museum to take this drawing class, and I actually rode with her in the elevator, and I was Frankenstein lady here. But what had happened was she was a right-handed professional artist and had been involved in a car accident where she had lost her right arm, or her right hand. So, she had like an empty sleeve here. And she had to reteach herself how to do everything that she had previously done naturally with the right hand with her left hand. And so she thought, oh my goodness, I've been a skilled professional artist. I now have to relearn to do something unnaturally with this hand over here that I didn't have to think about so much with this hand over here. And then she decided, so how do we teach kids that don't know how to draw naturally? They don't have an intuitive sense of how the pencil moves or intuitive sense of how to control their muscles. Well, she had skills and techniques and so forth to do that because she had to do that herself. So, yes, I say Cleinias, this is Socrates again talking. If only wisdom can be taught, and it does not come to a man spontaneously, for this is a point which is still to be considered and is not yet agreed upon by you and me. And then Cleinias interrupts him. But I think, Socrates, that wisdom can be taught. Oh, good, I don't have to convince you of it, right? He says, best of men, I said, I'm delighted to hear you say so. But now, as you think that wisdom can be taught, and that wisdom only can make a man happy and fortunate, will you not acknowledge that all of us ought to love wisdom, and you individually would try to love her? And the response is, certainly, Socrates. He said, I'll do my best. We ever see any references to wisdom being spoken of as a female, and that we are required to love her? Yeah. So we might disagree with Socrates on what ultimate happiness really is, and we might disagree with where wisdom starts, because what does Scripture say? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, but it can be taught, right? And we might even propose that it is the highest good. And so my first point here is that we as human beings, we need individual education. Aristotle said that nature abhors a vacuum. I have to explain the joke. Not worth it. But what he meant was empty space. So the idea was in the ancient world that empty space, space devoid of any matter, is so abhorrent to nature that nature would rather destroy itself than to permit a vacuum to exist. And respect for antiquity was so high in the 1600s that Pascal, who investigated these things and did some experiments that actually showed a vacuum did exist, he has to be very careful how he introduces his research to the public. He's got to address this issue of, well, how do we know things? And in the 1600s, there was a lot of debate over, well, do we go with authority, or do we go with the reason, or do we go with experience? And people were misapplying them. If you remember the troubles that Galileo had and so forth. How do you sort this stuff out? What's the proper way of knowing? Is there one exclusive way? Are there more than one? And so Pascal is, in his preface to the new experiments on the vacuum, has got to speak to this issue, and he says, well, men are different than animals. Animals kind of know things by instinct. such as like bees that produce honeycombs that have hexagons, right? Do they know anything about geometry? Well, no. They have this intuitive knowledge of how to do these things. And this is what Pascal says about education. Nature teaches them, that would be the animal world, in response to the pressures of necessity. But this frail knowledge dies with its need as they receive it without study. They do not have the happiness of preserving it, and at every time they are given it, they find it new, because nature, whose object is merely to maintain animals in an order of limited perfection, infuses in them this necessary knowledge, always the same, lest they perish, and does not allow them to add to it, lest they go beyond the boundaries prescribed for them. And then I love this next line. It is different with man, made only for infinity. He's ignorant at his life's first age, but he never ceases to learn as he goes forward, for he has the advantage not only of his own experience, but also of his predecessors, because he always keeps in his memory the knowledge he has once acquired. And that of the ancients is always his hand in the books they have left. And since he keeps his knowledge, he can also easily increase it, so that men today are in a certain sense in the same condition in which those ancient philosophers would be if they could have prolonged old age until now, adding to the knowledge they had had what their studies might have won for them by the grace of so many centuries. So Pascal says, we as a human race are acquiring and passing on knowledge to our children, in much the same way as the human race can be considered a single person, young at the beginning, older at the end. We would think that as people move forward in time, as we grow older, we learn more things. And perhaps our idea of things at the beginning of our life is not the same thing, is not the same idea as we would have in the middle. And so he's saying, well, we really aren't insulting Aristotle by saying something different than what he said. We are simply saying we've had more time to investigate and to explore, and we're learning. And so we can propose the opposite without actually insulting him or the research and the things that he wrote. So education is actually necessary for mankind as a whole. But what does Scripture say? Are you familiar with this one? Deuteronomy 6? Yeah. These words which I'm commanding you today shall be in your heart. You should teach them diligently to your sons. I'm assuming daughters as well, of course. And shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall bind them as a sign in your hand, and they shall be as sprinkles on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. This, I think, shows us very clearly that it's a family's job to educate. Educate the young. Diligently teach. But also notice the context. It didn't say call them into a classroom, perhaps, and sit them down and have them get out paper and pencil and then teach. It's teaching kind of as you're going. It's looking for the opportunities where they present themselves. So yes, we might do formal education as well, but in terms of children learn best in the context of relationships. And so when we can foster those relationships and look for the teachable moments, whether it be in math or in physics or drawing or music or whatever, there'll be times when the opportunity will present itself. Oh, this is as we go. We're going to stop now and do this. This is an opportunity. And of course, I got really frustrated with Proverbs because there's just so many of them. The Proverb of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, just the first 3 chapters. Okay, to receive instruction in wise behavior, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear an increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commandments within you, then there are blessings. Okay? Make your ear attentive to wisdom, and incline your heart to understanding. Don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life, peace they will add to you. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, then he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. There's something about youth that lends itself to education. Acquire wisdom and acquire understanding. Here we go. Do not forsake her, and she will guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is, well, acquire wisdom. And with all you're acquiring, get understanding. Guard her, she is your life. I had more, but those are the ones that I left. Okay. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But also Christ's ministry for adults was characterized by teaching. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and began to teach them. And then we have 2 Timothy 3:16, which I love. All Scripture is All right, honey, stop. Oh my goodness. Oh, no.
That's an
That's autocorrect for you. Rats, I gotta fix that. No, stop. Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, there's my mistake for today. I'm done with that. The rest of the day is going to go up. And profitable for teaching, for reproof and correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. We understand teaching perhaps, but this is different. What's the difference between teaching and training? If you look up that Greek word there, it's Paideia, which is the whole training and education of children, which relates to the cultivation of minds and morals, and employs for this purpose new commands and now commands and admonitions, now reproof and punishment. See, I'm going to be second guessing the overhead now all day long. It also includes the training and care of the body. Is physical education, should that be a part of basic schooling? And I don't mean physical education like necessarily learning how to, play softball or something like that. Should there be something in terms of the training of the body to control movements and things of that sort? Okay, another one, whatever an adult says also cultivates the soul, especially by correcting mistakes and curbing passions, and also instruction which aims at increasing virtue. Paideia is like this whole education for human beings. Whatever capacities human beings have, it's that training. It's not just, intellectual head knowledge, although that's included. It's the training up of all of it. And of course, if you're familiar with the Webster's 1828 dictionary, anybody have a copy of that? So yeah, I got it on the shelf in my room. I pull it out usually once a week, mainly because I've used a word my students don't know. I go look it up for them, read the definition. But it's so good. Here's education. The bringing up as of a child, education comprehends all that series of instruction and discipline which is intended to enlighten the understanding, correct the temper, and form the manners and habits of youth, and fit them for usefulness in their future stations. And then I love Webster's 1828 because he gives all these little commentaries. This is like tagged on the back of it. To give children a good education in manners, arts, and sciences is important. To give them a religious education is indispensable, and an immense responsibility rests on parents and guardians who neglect these duties. Can you imagine that being in, Webster's Complete Dictionary today? Oh, you want to know what you're here for? Why are you here? Well, education. Go look it up in the dictionary. Oh my goodness. Don't have any of that. Okay? So, we're the lucky ones. That's why I said at the beginning that this vocation that we've got, this calling that we've got, I think is the best one in the world. Okay? Because it's got eternity in mind. Now, what form should education take? There's different types of education. I'm going to look primarily at two. Oh, here's my final point. The need for education and the responsibility to educate is a fundamental part of human education, both individually and corporately. Okay? Both individuals, but also the human race as a whole. We're in this together as a society. We need to pass down, as Pascal said, the knowledge that we gain. And maybe the warnings to go along with it. Okay, next one. Vocational training. Training for a
vocation.
A job, right? Training for a job. That's traditionally called the servile arts, the arts of service, be it a mechanic, nurse, engineer, translator, painter, teacher, etc. If there's an education which trains people for a particular kind of a job, you're going to be doing this in the future as a means of earning a living or some kind of job that you're going to be doing, that would be a vocational or a servile art kind of a training. Now, think about a math class. Anybody here math teachers? Yeah? Okay. You remember, if you know your C.S. Lewis books, particularly the children's books, you remember The Magician's Nephew? Remember there was a word in that book called the deplorable word, right? Once it's spoken, like it kills all life except for the one that spoke it. So it's like the nuclear bomb of words, right? There's a deplorable question, which, I don't know, because I'm a math teacher, maybe I'm more familiar with it than others, but maybe it happens in other classes as well. What's the deplorable question that has the potential to kill all learning and all destruction and it's the bomb that goes off in class? Yeah?
Where am I going to use it?
No.
Yeah, that's right. Marsh, when am I ever going to use this in real life? I used to get angry at that question. And I actually had to think about why. What's the root assumption of that question? Why are you here? Well, why do they think they were here? For vocational training. Yeah. So, I shamelessly stole it off of Facebook. So I saw that, I was like, I'm taking that. Yeah. Do we say that about the other subjects? I've never seen one on Facebook that said, and yet another day has passed and I did not use poetry even once. Another day has passed and I haven't used anything I've learned in music class even once. Why is it maybe mathematics more than others that lends itself to this kind of a thing? But isn't it a valid question? If a student is sitting in class and they have the mindset, even if it's not a conscious one, that they're here to be trained for a job, what do we do with algebra? When am I ever going to use this? Okay? And teachers like to make up all kinds of strange, unusual ways. I'm going to balance my checkbook using algebra in this But we make everybody take algebra, right? Why? Do we do that accidentally in the hopes that maybe there's an engineer or a professional mathematician in the group that might use it someday, and then just everybody else, what else do we have? All the nurses, all the playwrights, all the mechanics, all the stay-at-home moms, because I've heard that argument too. All of them, they just have to suffer through, because we really don't know. We're just kind of throwing mud at the wall, and if it sticks, it was useful, and if not, well, at least you got hit with something.
I tell them every day, you do use it. It's a method of thinking.
You have to use it.
Maybe not the X and Y, but you're using the manner of thinking.
That's
It's
it.
a puzzle.
You're touching on it. Yeah, you're touching on it. Well, here's the thing. If we're doing things just for vocation, can we really even be successful at that? Do we really know what students are going to be using 10, 15, 20 years down the road? No. When am I ever going to use this in real life, Mr. Marsh, in my job? I have no idea, and neither do you, and nobody can answer that question for you, because I would bet you that probably half the jobs that will exist in 10, 15 years aren't even in existence now. Think of the jobs that are in place now that weren't in existence when I was in school. But it was a while ago, right? How can you predict what you're going to use in a particular job, right? So the question itself is fundamentally flawed. Even if you wanted to do a vocational type of education, you really can't do it at the basic level. Is there another way? Here we go. Here's a different perspective on education. Education is formative. Education of general skills that apply to all studies to maximize human potential and produce wisdom and virtue. Okay? That was traditionally accomplished through a very particular set of curriculum. Okay? Vocational versus formative. The idea of formative means what are we doing? We're taking the individual and we're forming them, we're shaping them, right? Like a lump of clay on the wheel. Okay? A formative education. What applies to all studies? How do you maximize human potential and produce, of course, in the end, wisdom and virtue? It was done through the 7 liberal arts. Anybody seen those before? They're actually subjects, right? The first 3 are the language arts. We call those the trivium. The last 4 are the mathematical arts, called the quadrivium. But it were those 7, and in that order, which was the classical study for a formative education, right? Grammar would be the rules of language. Logic would be the rules of thought and of sound thinking. It's funny how that one is like almost entirely absent from education today. Rhetoric, the art of persuasion. That's really good. Lots of times that's turned into propaganda because we don't have this element in place. But then we've got the 4 that I actually am partial to. Arithmetic, which Nicomachus tells us means absolute quantity. The numbers, the properties of just numbers themselves. Even, odd, so forth. What do you do when you multiply an odd number by an even number and those sorts of things? Music, but not the music the way we commonly think about it. Nicomachus told us that music was relative quantity. The things that you can take quantitatively, how do they relate to each other? Now we see that in modern sound type music, right? A more appropriate word there might be harmony or discord, right? Why do some sounds sound good together and other sound bad together? You ever watch like a scary movie with the sound turned off and the captions on? boring, right? In fact, there's a couple of videos on YouTube where somebody has taken the opening sequence to The Shining. I don't recommend that you watch that, but if you see it, the opening sequence, it's a long car and it's very ominous, like tense music, like it makes my back muscles scrunch up. Somebody has taken that video clip and put like a happy dappy camp song to it, and it changes the whole mood, right? What is this thing of music in terms of the relationship between things? Okay, so music was the relationship between quantities. Geometry then was size, but size at rest, and astronomy, the ancient art, was size in motion, and they kind of have to go in that order. Nicomachus does a really good job of explaining why this must precede that and so forth. For astronomy today, I think we can kind of lump in all the physical sciences, right? Everybody should study these things, okay? Why? Well, because they do this for us. They apply to general skills. Okay, they maximize human potential and produce wisdom and virtue, and that's what you were saying, is that, oh, it's thinking skills, right? Not so much that you're ever going to use algebra in your job. You might not. I really don't care if you don't, okay? What is it producing in you as a human being? Okay, so the slave and the free man. Back to the classical Greek definition of these things. Well, okay, the slave got an education in the servile arts. The free man got an education in the liberal arts. They thought the servile arts was education only fitting for a slave. What does a slave have to do? A slave doesn't have to do anything other than just obey and execute. Who takes care of his food and clothing and shelter? His master. Who makes his political decisions for him? His master. Who manages his affairs? His master. All he's got to do is take an order, know how to accomplish it, and then do it. Master take care of everything else. But what about free man? Free man's got to be responsible for his own household, right? He's got to be responsible for his own food, clothing, and shelter. Okay? In the political sense, he's got to be able to make sound and just decisions with his vote. In the sense of problem solving, he's got to then create new, different, perhaps unorthodox ways of solving his problems. It was understood that a free man could very easily learn the task of the slave, but it was nigh impossible for the slave to do the reverse. And so it was basically the education that made the difference. And if you remember the classical Greek culture, what would they do? They would like go around and like raid each other and like take the losers as slaves and have them do the cooking and their carpentry or farming and stuff like that. And they would sit around and philosophize. What were they doing? They were studying the liberal arts. Okay. There was a little pushback against the progressive movement in the early 1920s, which shifted away from a liberal arts education. There was some pushback from it in the 50s and then later on in the 20th century. This is Robert Hutchins, who was one of the editors of the Great Books series. You guys know what the Great Book series is? Robert Hutchins and Mortimer Adler were the guys that kind of mainly spearheaded that. This is what Robert Hutchins says in the first book of that series. He says the aim of liberal education is human excellence, both private and public, for man's political animal. Its object is the excellence of man as man and man as citizen. It regards man as an end and not as a means. Think about that for a second. The goal of education is for the individual, not for the individual to do something else for somebody else. And it regards the ends of life and not the means to it. For this reason, it's the education of free men. Other types of education or training treat men as means to some other end, or at best concerned with the means of life, earning a living and not with its ends. So a liberal education seeks to actually be formative, to train up the person in the way that maximizes their human potential. What does it mean to be a flourishing human? That's what a formative education is. Not just content-wise, though. You need to have a broad range of understanding in different subject areas if you're going to be in charge of yourself. You've got to have education in a broad range of subjects, but also a liberal arts education does more than just content training. It teaches the tools of learning. Again, Hutchins says the method of liberal education is the liberal arts, and the result of liberal education is discipline in those arts. The liberal artist learns to, here's a nice list, read, write, speak, listen, understand, and think. He learns to reckon, measure, manipulate matter, quantity, and motion in order to predict, produce, and exchange. All of these things the subjects do for us. Maybe it's not the subject in itself that's important. Maybe it's those things that are produced in us, the ability to manipulate quantities, the ability to predict what will happen, the ability to write and to speak and to listen, and to not just receive words, but, as Dorothy Sayers says, to fling them back in a discussion, those sorts of things. So as we live in the tradition, whether we know it or not, so we are all liberal artists, whether we know it or not. We all practice the liberal arts, well or badly, all the time, every day. As we should understand the tradition as well as we can in order to understand ourselves, so we should be as good liberal artists as we can in order to become as fully human as we can. And then here's what his partner Adler said. The ultimate goal of the education process is to help human beings become educated persons. Schooling is the preparatory stage. It forms the habit of learning and provides the means for continuing to learn after all schooling is complete. See, the modern education idea says that all learning stops when school stops. So we have to throw everything at a student that we can, because after they leave school, well, it's like they're just going to have to go on their own. But schooling should be the preparation stage where you learn how to learn. Okay, how do we do this? By imparting to them the skills of learning and giving them the stimulation that will motivate them to keep their minds actively engaged in learning. Schooling, basic or advanced, that does not prepare the individual for further learning has failed, no matter what else it succeeds in doing. So education then is formative at its best. Rex. I was wondering if that would show up. Anybody recognize that at all?
Oh, yeah.
You recognize it?
Yeah.
It's the Karate Kid, the original. There is no remake, right? You can ignore the remake. So if you don't know the story, Daniel is a troubled teenager, moved to California from New Jersey, a new school, rules he doesn't understand, and he gets picked on, and he gets beat up by the local karate bully. And he likes a girl, and so the karate bully is the girl's boyfriend, and he treats her badly, and so Daniel steps in to defend her and gets beat up and so forth. But the maintenance man at the apartment complex he lives at, whose name is Mr. Miyagi, yeah. Mr. Miyagi magically shows up and goes all ninja on the bullies and saves them. So Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi to teach him karate, and Mr. Miyagi says, "You come back in the morning." But what does he make Daniel do? Yeah, he gives him a bunch of household chores, right? The first one is sand the floor, and he makes very clear you have to sand the floor this way and sand the floor that way, and sands the whole floor. Come back tomorrow. Paint the fence, and then it's up and down, right? Long board right hand, short board left hand, and he paint the whole fence, all around the whole property. And then it's paint the house, which is side to side, and then it's the classic, what was it with the cars? Wax on, put the wax on this way, put the wax off that way. And there's this iconic scene, which has got some foul language in there, so if you don't want to show it to your students, have the mute button handy. But Daniel's just had it, right? He says, "I'm your slave. I've been doing this, and doing this, and doing that, and doing that. I thought you were going to teach me karate." And he says, "Forget it, I'm out of here." And Mr. Miyagi makes him come back and says, "Show me, sand the floor." And he says, "Show." And so he shows him this. And he shows him each technique again with a little bit of input. And then he says again, "Show me." And then he throws a punch at him, right? And of course, if you've seen the movie, you know what happens. It was actually in the sanding of the floor and the painting of the house and the waxing on the waxing off that was producing in Daniel the moves that he needed to know in order to actually defend himself. It was so repetitious that he did it actually without thinking. And it dawns on him, right? It dawns on him, oh my goodness, I know karate. I didn't realize I was learning it, right? I show this clip to the students in class at the end of the year when they're just they're preparing for finals, and they're like, and I hear the question again, You don't know. You're going to have your moment later on when, you're going to draw on this, and it will be there. And if you don't have it, you can't draw from it. Oh my goodness, algebra 2, the debate about why do we have to do this? Why do we teach poetry? Why do we teach kids, how to color the lines when they're in first grade? Oh, my homework is so hard tonight, Mom. I got to color all these circles. I'm going to get in trouble if I go in lines. Why do we have them cut out shapes with scissors? Are they going to be future interior designers or tailors where they have to cut out cloth? What is it doing to them? It's fine motor skill, right? It's hand-eye coordination. Okay, that's kind of what's going on with quadratic formula, believe it or not, right? So, you know, pick which one, pick the necessary one. Here's Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more, yeah, you know, I can't read. Which one's necessary? I propose both of them, okay, and not for vocational training. Why? Just as the emerging mathematician should wrestle with poetry, so too should the emerging poet wrestle with mathematics. Both studies are essential to answering the question of what it means to be a human being. Okay, so yeah, everybody should take algebra. But it's actually more than just intellectual skills, though. Does it change how we teach? For a long time, I taught my math classes as like, well, okay, I'm here to teach the math track, and the people who struggle with it, well, sorry about that. Okay. Do we teach it as a liberal art, or are we teaching as vocational training? Okay. The students that I have in my class, all of them are there, right? I should teach all of them. What should every person who considers themselves well educated know about mathematics, and how should they think about the subject? How can mathematics benefit each and every one of them? The ones that are going to go on and do it for their vocation, they'll get their specialized training later on. Okay. But for the ones that don't, what do they need out of the subject? How is it forming them? Okay. It also can produce reason and understanding. Dr. Hutchins, the liberally educated man has a mind that can operate well in all fields. He may be a specialist in one field, but he can understand anything important that's said in any field, and can see and use the light that it sheds on its own. Do we have a population today that really can't think beyond the end of the nose? It has to be told what goes on in other areas. Oh, I can't understand that. Oh, I can't understand that. Right? And then Adler, in his book, The Paideia Proposal, actually has this little chart. This is fantastic. This was probably the first thing that revolutionized my teaching philosophy. Column 1, he says there's 3 different modes. Column 1 is the acquisition of organized knowledge. Yeah, you need knowledge in language, literature, fine arts, mathematics, natural science, history, geography, and the social science. I would maybe call this the modern kind of liberal arts curriculum. He says, but if all you do is teach content, you're barely scratching the surface. The content should be teaching these skills, intellectual skills: reading, writing, speaking, listening, calculating, problem solving, observing, measuring, estimating, exercising critical judgment. And I have to admit, I'm still trying to figure out how to do that in math class, because the content in the textbooks is primarily computational. Do this computation, do that computation, do this computation. Here's this technique, here's that technique. Where do we ever give the chance to the students, here's the problem, go figure it out. Oh, how do we take this, that, and use it to creatively learn something new or do something different? But then this last one is almost entirely absent. Okay? An enlarged understanding of ideas and values by Socratic questioning. He says discussion of books, and notice he says not textbook, okay, and other works of art and involvement in artistic activities. What he says here is that we need to give students opportunities to read things of merit in the field, and then discuss the merit of those things. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Okay, is it proper? Is it improper? Is this good painting? Is this bad painting? I find good paintings bad paintings. Is the author right in his ideas, or is he wrong? It's a question and answer. Okay? If you could call this column to know, this one to do, this one here would be, what kind of person should we be? He says the liberal arts are not merely indispensable, they are unavoidable. Nobody can decide for himself whether he is going to be a human being. The only question open to him is whether he will be an ignorant, undeveloped one, or one who has sought to reach the highest point he is capable of attaining. The question is, in short, is whether he will be a poor liberal artist or a good one. So I propose the basic goal of schooling should be, the goal of basic schooling should not be simple preparation for a job, but for maximizing the human potential of our students in order to be free and independent people. And education in the liberal arts is the means to accomplish this. It must come first before specific job training. But are we free? Who receives the benefit of the education? Well, in the classical sense, the slave profits the master. In the liberal arts sense, the free man profits himself. What's the scriptural perspective? Are we really free? Yeah. Do we teach kids to maximize their human potential so they can go out and get, cars and money and girlfriends and happiness, right? Do we students to serve ourselves. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It's the Lord Christ whom you serve. 1 Peter 2:16. Act as free men. Oh, good. So we're free, right? We're not using freedom as a covering for evil. Use it as bond slave to God. What's a bond slave? A free man? Almost. Right? Bond slave was a slave that said, I love my master. I've been set free, but I don't want to leave. And so what was it? They would take the slave to the door of the master's house and punch a hole in his ear and put an earring in there, and then he was a slave not because he had been conquered or had debt or something like that. He was a slave by choice. I choose to serve the master, and they had a different kind of idea behind them. What were they called? There's a certain word. Oh, right. Too far ahead. Steward? You guys have heard of a steward? Someone who is acting as a free man, but in place of another. There's a stewardship principle here involved with regards to education. Joseph, I think, is the best Old Testament example for that. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read that whole thing. But Joseph, sold into slavery, what does he do? He starts to do what he can do to profit his master, even though he's a pagan Egyptian. Okay? So the Egyptian, Potiphar, left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Joseph didn't serve himself. Joseph served Potiphar and used his talents and abilities to benefit Potiphar. He got in trouble. Unrighteously so. Got thrown in jail, which, by the way, was in Potiphar's house. If you actually go read the account, pay attention, Potiphar puts him in his basement. I wonder if when it said Potiphar's anger burned, if he was actually mad at Joseph or mad at his wife. But anyway, so the jailer all of a sudden realizes, hey, this guy is a servant leader, right? Let's put him in charge. And so the same thing was said about Joseph with the jailer. Didn't concern himself with anything. And it goes all the way up to Pharaoh, right? Same thing again. Pharaoh puts him as number 2 in charge of the entire known world. What does he do? He profits Pharaoh. Okay? What are we teaching our children? Education to serve yourself or education to serve the Lord? This brings up the idea of the parable of the talents. Okay? Just like a man about to go on a journey, right? You know the story, don't you? Called his servants to him, trusted his possessions. To one he gave 5, to another 2, another 1, each according to their ability. And then they go off. The first 2 actually do something to profit. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. And the first 2 have got something to show for what they've done. It wasn't their money to begin with. Okay? They're there to profit the master. Here, act as a free man, but you're not going to keep the change, basically. You're going to bring that back and submit that to me in the end. Give an account for what you've done. Okay? The man who received just 1 came back and had excuses. Why didn't you at least just go put it in the bank so I could just get the basic interest in return on it? Okay, there's accountability somewhere. Now, we've got to be careful on how we interpret this, because lots of folks want to interpret in the particular, well, the talents for this, and it means you need to double your money here and invest here. I don't think so. Christ didn't interpret it particularly. The thing he said is the kingdom of heaven is like this, which simply means, hey, the master's given us things. We have to give an account for how we use them. But notice what he says to those that have done well. Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. After the joy of your master. And then here's a more difficult one, Luke 16. You hardly ever hear a sermon on Luke 16. And this is problematic. There was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And this is where the story gets off track. I think it's an unfortunate translation. This should be falsely reported. He wasn't actually doing it. There's no indication in the brief that he actually did it. He did the crime. Okay, but his master calls him and said, what's this out here? Give an account. I'm taking the management away from you. So the manager said to himself, what should I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. He's honest. I got nothing to do. I'm too proud to go out and beg for money. I know what I shall do so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. And he summoned each of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And And he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and weigh 80. I'm not sure that he's cooking the books or he's just settling up the debt. But I don't really think that's the issue. His master praised the unrighteous manager, or the manager of unrighteousness. Because what kind of wealth was he managing? Holy wealth? It was common wealth, right? It's just common money. It's like unrighteous wealth. It's not righteous. It's not holy. It's just common money. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by the means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into. This is interesting. Eternal dwelling. This is the master again. I wasn't talking about eternal dwellings. And here's the switch over, right? This is Jesus now talking. He says, he who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, common wealth, worldly wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? For no servant can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So this steward, this unrighteous steward, or the steward of unrighteous wealth said, oh my goodness, all of a sudden his perspective has changed. He's like, there's an end. What am I going to do after? I don't know. I'm going to use my influence here and the opportunities I have to do something profitable for the after. Are we teaching our students just to go out and, be liberally educated and be free men so that they can just serve themselves in this world? And that's tough to do, because it has to kind of be, I don't know, can you actually teach that openly from the classroom, or does it kind of have to be like the flavor of the soup in which the class is taught? Maybe both. Okay? What are we doing with the wealth and the resources that we've got in this world? Are we using it just to serve ourselves? Or are we using it in such a way as to actually profit our master, who's Christ? Right? Joseph's job was to profit his master. What have we got? I don't think it's just money. I think it's time, resources, gifts, talents. Teaching our students to actually, hey, you're not just here to serve yourselves. You're not here just to go off to earn a great career and to have lots of money and to take care of your family. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But the purpose is, are you using it as a good steward? Because what do you like to say that Christ will say to us at the end of the age? Look, here you go. Well done, good and faithful servant, right? Enter into the joy of your Lord. Okay, so we're called to be stewards, to use our worldly wealth, including education, money, time, and resources which God has entrusted us to benefit and profit His kingdom. Not particularly to profit and benefit ourselves. We as teachers are probably doing this already. I trust that's a large part of why you folks are here. Are we training our students to do the same? It's just for us, it's for them too. And then there's some resources if you want. Here's my email address if you want to email me. This is Mortimer Adler's book, The Paideia Proposal, and this is a modern version of The Great Conversation, Volume 1, Robert Hutchins. Investigate those any further. Any questions, comments? I'm wrapped up for today. No. Ms. Tammy, what's that?
We can take a 5-minute break, and then Dan is up next. So if we just take a quick break, that'd be great.
Dan, are you doing something with the
No.
Okay. I'll shut it down.
Okay. It turns out